Billionaire's daughter Lily had everything most children could only dream of. Her own playroom filled with toys from around the world, a sprawling garden where flowers bloomed all year round, a bedroom as big as some people's entire homes. But none of it mattered, because the one thing she needed the most had been taken from her far too soon. Her mother's sudden death had shattered something inside her, leaving an emptiness that no amount of comfort or luxury could fill. She was only 8 years old, but the loss had turned her into a small, quiet fortress. The kind of fortress no one could enter no matter how much they tried. At first, her father thought time would heal it. He told himself that children were resilient, that eventually the pain would fade, and Lily would return to the bright, curious little girl she had been. But time didn't heal it, time hardened it. Weeks passed, then months, and instead of softening, Lily's grief calcified into a stubborn shield. She stopped smiling. She stopped asking questions. She stopped looking people in the eye. And when anyone tried to get close, maids, nannies, tutors, she would meet them with icy silence or sudden explosions of anger. Her father was a powerful man in the business world, known for making impossible deals happen. But at home with his own daughter he felt powerless. Every time he hired someone new he would hope just maybe this one would break through to her. And every time that hope crumbled. The longest anyone lasted was 2 days. Most didn't even make it past the first hour. They would walk into her world with practiced smiles and carefully chosen words, only to walk out with slumped shoulders and muttered excuses. One maid left in tears after Lily told her she hated her for touching her toys. Another quit after Lily locked herself in her room for the entire afternoon, refusing to answer or come out. There was even one who simply placed her apron on the kitchen counter and walked out without a word. Each departure carved a deeper line of frustration on her father's face, though he never blamed Lily openly. He knew she wasn't trying to be cruel. She was protecting herself. The truth was, Lily's mother had been her safe place. She had been the one to tuck her in at night, the one to laugh with her over spilled milk, the one to listen when she was scared. And then in the span of a single morning, she was gone. Gone in a way no one had explained well enough for Lily to understand. She had overheard words like accident and instant, but they meant nothing except that her mother would never walk through the door again. The adults had tried to soften it, to tell her that her mother was in a better place. But all Lily heard was that the one person she needed most had chosen to be somewhere else. So she closed herself off. She told herself she didn't need anyone, that if she didn't let anyone in, no one could leave her again. And that included the endless stream of strangers her father hired. She knew they'd leave sooner or later. They always did, so why let them get close? Better to push them away before they had the chance to hurt her. She became an expert at pushing people away. Sometimes she would sit silently and refuse to respond to even the simplest question. Other times she would explode, yelling or throwing things, until the maid's patience wore thin. And on the rare occasion someone tried to comfort her, she would stiffen and pull away as if their kindness burned. Her father tried speaking to her, but his own grief was tangled up in his voice, and the conversations would end in awkward silence. He would promise her that everything would be okay, but even he didn't believe it. At night, when no one was watching, Lily would sit on her bed with the lights off, clutching her stuffed rabbit with one ear missing. She had held it on the day her mother died, and somehow she believed that as long as she kept it close, she was keeping a piece of her mother with her. Sometimes she would press her face into its worn fur and whisper things she couldn't say out loud, how she missed the way her mother smelled, how she hated the sound of her father's footsteps fading when he left for work, how she felt invisible in the big empty house. Her father saw pieces of this, but he didn't know how to reach her. In the boardroom, he could read people's intentions with a glance. At home he was lost in a maze. The truth he didn't want to admit, even to himself, was that he didn't know his daughter anymore. She was slipping further away with each passing day, and he was afraid one day she would be so far gone that nothing could bring her back. Friends told him to get her professional help. He did. But even the therapist she saw didn't last long. Lily would sit through the sessions without a word, or worse, she would say something sharp enough to make them stop trying. Once, after a particularly cold session, the therapist had taken him aside and gently suggested that what Lily needed wasn't another stranger asking questions. It was someone who would simply stay, no matter how hard she tried to push them away. But how could he find someone like that? The agency he used had practically run out of candidates. "We've sent you everyone we have," the woman on the phone told him one morning, her tone apologetic. "Lily's a challenge. We understand. We'll keep looking." He hung up the phone and stared out the window at the gray sky, feeling more alone than ever. Then came the day that would change everything. A man named Jack showed up at the door, not in a maid's uniform, not holding a stack of glowing references, but standing tall in a plain jacket, holding his cap in one hand. The agency had sent him, though not exactly for this role. Jack was a veteran, a single father whose own daughter was now grown. He wasn't trained as a nanny or maid. He didn't have a degree in child psychology. But he had something else, years of patience learned in places where patience could mean survival, and the quiet understanding of a parent who had watched his own child navigate grief. When he walked into the house for the first time, Lily didn't even look up. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor of her playroom, her back to the door, holding that same stuffed rabbit. Jack didn't rush to introduce himself. He didn't kneel down and speak in the overly bright tone most adults use with children. He simply stepped inside, sat down a few feet away, and began fixing a small toy soldier whose arm had broken. Minutes passed. The silence stretched. Then finally Lily's voice, small but certain. "You fixed it wrong." Jack looked up, met her gaze for the first time and smiled. Not the fake practice kind, but the kind that carried a hint of warmth. "Then show me the right way," he said, and handed her the soldier. It was the first thing she had said to anyone new in months. That moment didn't erase all the walls she had built. Not even close. But for the first time in a long time there was a tiny crack in them. And through that crack just maybe something or someone could begin to reach her. Jack had been through enough storms in life to know that some battles weren't won with force. He had learned that in the deserts overseas, where patience could save lives, and later at home, raising his daughter alone after his wife died. War had taught him to move carefully, to wait for the right moment, to read the smallest changes in a person's voice or eyes. Fatherhood had taught him to love without expecting anything in return. Now, both of those lessons came with him when he stepped into the billionaire's home for the first time. He didn't arrive in a rush of energy like the others had. He didn't try to break the ice with silly jokes or over-the-top cheerfulness. He had no interest in forcing himself into a space that clearly wasn't ready for him. Instead, he simply observed. The house was beautiful, yes, but there was a heaviness in the air. The kind that made your footsteps feel louder. Every detail, polished floors, expensive furniture, spotless walls, spoke of perfection, but perfection without warmth. It was the kind of home where nothing was out of place, yet something vital was missing. He found Lily in her playroom. She didn't even glance at him when he entered. She sat on the floor with her back to him, her small shoulders slightly hunched, the stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. Most people would have walked over, knelt down, and introduced themselves immediately, trying to spark her interest. Jack didn't. Instead, he took a seat on the opposite side of the room and pulled a broken toy soldier from the nearby shelf. He didn't say a word. He simply began working quietly, fixing its arm with a piece of tape and a steady hand. The silence stretched long enough for most people to grow uncomfortable, but Jack knew better. He didn't need her to speak first. He just needed her to know he wasn't there to intrude. Minutes passed before she finally muttered, "You fixed it wrong." Her voice was soft, almost reluctant, as though she didn't want to give him the satisfaction of a conversation. Jack looked at the toy, then at her. "Then show me the right way," he said, offering it to her without hesitation. It wasn't a challenge. It was an invitation, one that didn't demand anything from her except the choice to take it or not. After a pause, she reached for it. That was the beginning. Not a breakthrough, not a sudden bond, but the first small step. Jack knew better than to expect miracles overnight. He treated each day like a slow climb, where every inch mattered. The first few days she barely acknowledged him. She would eat her meals without speaking, play in silence, and retreat to her room whenever she felt him lingering too long. Jack didn't chase her. He let her have her space but always made sure she knew he was nearby. On the third morning, he found her in the garden, sitting cross-legged among the flowers. She was picking petals from a daisy and letting them scatter in the wind. Jack didn't ask what she was doing. He didn't remind her not to damage the flowers. Instead, He sat down a few feet away and began whittling a piece of wood he had brought from home. It was something he had done during long nights overseas, a way to keep his hands busy while his mind settled. He didn't even realize she was watching until she asked, "What are you making?" He looked up, surprised but careful not to make too much of it. "Not sure yet. What do you think it should be?" She studied it for a moment before shrugging. "A bird." From then on, he made her small wooden animals whenever she would talk to him long enough to suggest one. A bird, a fox, a tiny rabbit with lopsided ears. He would leave them outside her door when she didn't want company, and sometimes they would disappear by the next morning. Jack understood that Lily's defiance wasn't about bad behavior. It was about fear. She had learned that people left. The only way to protect herself was to push them away before they could walk out on her. He never told her she was wrong to feel that way. He never scolded her for ignoring him. Instead, he became something she didn't realize she needed. Predictable. He showed up every morning at the same time. He made her breakfast even if she didn't eat it. He sat in the same chair by the window in the evening, reading quietly while she played. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep, and he didn't try to win her over with gifts. It was on the 7th day that something shifted. A storm had rolled in, and the thunder rattled the windows. Jack found her under the dining table, hugging her rabbit so tightly her knuckles were white. She didn't notice him at first, but when she did, her eyes were wide and filled with panic. He didn't rush in to comfort her. He didn't tell her it was just a storm. Instead, he crouched beside the table and spoke in the calm, steady voice he used to use with young soldiers facing their first battle. "I don't like thunder either," he admitted. "When I was your age, I used to hide in the closet." She blinked at him, as if surprised he would admit to fear. "I used to count between the lightning and the thunder," he continued. Every second meant the storm was getting farther away. He sat cross-legged beside her and began counting out loud after each flash. First she didn't join in. But by the 3rd flash, her voice was a quiet whisper alongside his. By the 5th she was leaning slightly toward him, her grip on the rabbit loosening. When the storm finally passed, she didn't thank him or say anything at all. But she stayed beside him under the table for a few extra minutes, and Jack knew that was her way of saying she felt safe. The real turning point came 2 weeks later. Jack had brought out an old chess set he had kept from his army days. He set it up on the coffee table without saying a word. Lily wandered over, curious. "What's that?" "It's a game," he said simply. "Want me to show you?" She hesitated but sat down across from him. He explained the pieces, letting her move them freely at first. She made silly moves on purpose, giggling when his knight got trapped. It was the first time he had heard her laugh. That sound told him more than words ever could. She was beginning to trust him. Her father began to notice too. He would come home from work and find Lily sitting in the living room with Jack, talking about things she had never shared before. How she missed her mother's pancakes, how she didn't like sleeping with the door open, how the rabbit was the only thing that still smelled like her mom. Jack didn't try to fix those things for her. He just listened, letting her know that her feelings mattered. One evening while they were building a fort out of couch cushions, Lily suddenly said, "You don't leave." Jack froze for a moment then replied softly, "I'm not planning to." She didn't respond, but she handed him another pillow for the fort, and he took it as the highest kind of trust she could give. Jack's patience wasn't about doing nothing, it was about doing the right small things over and over until they added up to something bigger. He showed her that people could stay, that not everyone would vanish when things got hard. And slowly her walls began to crumble. By the end of the first month, Lily would seek him out instead of avoiding him. She would knock on his door in the morning to tell him breakfast was ready, or ask if he wanted to play chess again. She even began making small wooden animals herself, copying his style, and leaving them outside his door just as he had done for her. For Jack, it wasn't about winning her over. It was about giving her back something she had lost long before he arrived. The belief that she wasn't alone. And for Lily, that was the first step toward healing. It was never one grand gesture that began to change Lily. It was the small things, the moments so ordinary that no one else might have noticed. Jack understood that trust wasn't something you could demand. It was something you earned piece by piece, like stacking tiny stones until they became a wall strong enough to hold someone up instead of keeping them out. He didn't rush. He didn't try to force her to open up before she was ready. He simply stayed. Every morning, he was there in the kitchen, already brewing tea and frying eggs. At first, Lily never joined him. She'd linger in the hallway, peeking in, then disappear before he could greet her. But Jack always made an extra plate and set it at the table, never calling her to eat, never pointing it out. One morning, he heard the faint scrape of a chair and the soft clink of a fork. She didn't speak, didn't even look at him, but she ate every bite. The next morning, she was there again, and this time she mumbled, "The eggs are better when you don't burn them." Jack only chuckled. "I'll remember that." Afternoons were harder. That was when her loneliness seemed to sink in the most. He would find her wandering the garden, or curled up in the window seat with her rabbit, staring at nothing. Instead of telling her to cheer up or find something to do, he would bring his own projects to wherever she was. Sometimes it was polishing his old boots, sometimes sanding a block of wood into something that might become a fox or a bird. She wouldn't talk right away, but eventually curiosity would get the better of her. She would ask what he was doing, and he would hand her the sandpaper or a spare brush without a word, letting her decide whether to join in. Most days she did. Jack also told her stories, not about war, not about loss, but about his daughter when she was little. He'd tell her how his girl used to try to make pancakes and always ended up flipping them onto the floor, or how she once built a tent in the living room and refused to come out until he brought her snacks. Lily never asked outright for these stories, but she listened closely, sometimes pretending not to care, only to repeat small details days later. Once, when he mentioned that his daughter had loved hot chocolate on rainy days, Lily appeared the next storm with 2 mugs, sliding one across the table to him without meeting his eyes. The laughter came slowly, at first in small bursts, like a sound she wasn't used to making anymore. One afternoon they were playing chess and Jack made an obviously terrible move, letting her queen capture his rook. She smirked. "That was dumb." He put on a wounded expression. "Hey, maybe I wanted you to win." She laughed, really laughed, and the sound filled the room in a way Jack hadn't heard since he'd arrived. After that, he made more mistakes just to hear it again. He noticed she had a way of testing him. Sometimes she would say something sharp just to see if he'd get angry. Other times she would ignore him completely, waiting to see if he'd give up and leave like everyone else. But Jack never rose to the bait. If she snapped at him, he answered calmly. If she ignored him, he stayed nearby anyway, working on something quietly. She learned that no matter how she acted, he didn't go anywhere. That constancy began to matter to her more than she wanted to admit. The stuffed rabbit was her most guarded possession. She didn't let anyone touch it. Not her father, not the maids before Jack, not even the cleaners. But one evening when she fell asleep on the couch after reading, the rabbit slipped from her hands. Jack carefully placed it beside her so she would find it there when she woke. The next morning it was waiting for him on the kitchen table, and though she didn't say anything, he knew she was thanking him in her own way. It was in these small exchanges that her walls began to crack. One rainy afternoon, they were sitting in the living room, listening to the rain tap against the windows. Jack started carving a bird out of wood, and Lily watched quietly before asking, "Why do you make animals?" He thought for a moment before answering, "Because they remind me of things worth protecting." She was silent for a long time after that, then whispered, "The rabbit is worth protecting." He nodded. "It is." That night, she left one of his carved birds outside his door. Her father noticed the changes too. The tantrums had all but disappeared. She ate more. She started humming sometimes in the mornings, and one day he caught her sitting at the piano, pressing the keys softly, something she hadn't done since her mother died. Jack never claimed credit, but the billionaire knew it was because of him. It wasn't just that Jack cared, it was that he cared without conditions. One evening after dinner, Jack suggested they make pancakes together. She hesitated, then agreed, warning him she wasn't good at it. They ended up burning the first batch, spilling batter on the counter, and laughing until her cheeks hurt. Jack pretended the burnt ones were the best, making a big show of eating them. "These have character," he said, and she laughed again, shaking her head. That became their Sunday ritual, pancakes, no matter how messy the kitchen got. The biggest moment came when she asked him about his wife. It was late, and they were sitting on the porch watching the fireflies. She asked quietly, "Did you miss her when she was gone?" Jack didn't sugarcoat it. "Every day," he said. "Some days more than others. But I still talk to her sometimes just to feel like she's here." Lily nodded, holding her rabbit tighter. "I talk to Mom too," she admitted. Jack didn't tell her it was silly or childish. He just said, "Then you keep talking to her." It was after that night that she began sharing more. She told him about the day her mother had promised to take her to the beach, but the rain had ruined it. About the way her mother used to braid her hair too tight. About how she hated the smell of hospitals now. Jack listened to every word, never rushing her, never changing the subject. Sometimes when she got quiet, he would tell her another story, about his daughter, about his travels, about the time he and his unit rescued a stray dog in the middle of a storm. Her laughter became a regular sound in the house. Sometimes it was soft, sometimes loud, sometimes so sudden it surprised even her. Jack never pointed it out when it happened. He just let it be, letting her rediscover it for herself. And every time she laughed, it was like watching a little more light come back into her. The healing wasn't perfect. There were still days when she retreated into herself, days when she wouldn't talk to anyone, days when the weight of missing her mother felt too heavy to carry. But Jack was there for those days too. He didn't try to fix the sadness. He simply sat beside her in it, letting her know she didn't have to carry it alone. Over time, the small moments added up to something much larger. She began leaving her door open at night. She asked if he could teach her how to carve wood like he did. She even started helping in the kitchen, her hands clumsy but eager. And then one evening she said something that made Jack's chest tighten. They were sitting on the couch, and she rested her head lightly against his arm. "You don't feel like one of the people who leave," she murmured. Jack didn't know how to respond right away. But then he said the only thing that felt true. "I'm not." And she believed him, not because he promised it, but because he had shown her day after day, in all the little ways that mattered, that he was here to stay. Those moments, those countless small acts of patience and care, were what slowly mended the cracks in her heart. They didn't erase the loss, but they gave her something new to hold on to, something strong enough to let her start imagining a future where trust, laughter, and love were possible again.